Well, I'd like to introduce a colleague, Todd Bohling, and he's a member of Christ the Servant Lutheran. And the two of us will be changing the trend a little bit, and we're going to explore possibilities that are financing approaches that use member funds, member capital. And Todd's got some creative ideas along these lines, and he gets to go first because we ended up using sort of a variation of the technique that he developed, and it was later adapted by St. John's Episcopal in Boulder. And then we found it and sort of twisted it again to allow us to do what we did in this facility. So Todd's the leader, and he's going to start out.
So I'm Todd, and I'm from Christ the Servant Lutheran Church. And I wish there would have been some forum like this in 2009, 2010, because kind of did it all on my own with the help of a few people at the church. I was, give you a little bit of the timeline. I'm not going to cover everything, but I was mowing the yard. The story is I was mowing the yard at the church. We're a small church, and our roof is perfect for solar panels. And God spoke to me and said, hey, look at that. Can you figure it out? And I don't know why, but I was driven and passionate about figuring out a way to get it done. At the time, Excel was still offering rebates, and I just needed to figure out, all right, do I enlist partners or do I try to do this on my own, etc. So luckily, like the next Sunday, another guy heard about me trying to maybe do solar panels, and he had solar panels on his house. So you know how God works in these great ways. He goes, hey, I hadn't talked to him at all, that you're thinking about doing solar panels. And I said, yeah. He goes, you know what? I'd like to support it. So between me and Steve Kins, roughly April, May-ish, we started working through the details of how we could make this happen. I first went to the facilities committee and said, all right, team, is there anything that's crazy about trying to put solar panels on the church and save us roughly $285,000 over 20 or 30 years? And I have a great facilities team. We're small. They said, no, we got to try to figure out how to do this. So once I got the blessing from the facilities, people that I respected, gentlemen and women that I really respected, I go, all right, let's move forward with that. At the same time, they were talking about control systems up here. Since I was a member of the facilities committee, had to do a little more research to figure out, all right, how much are we using? So, you know, just like everybody was talking about, you need to figure out what your usage is, your demand, and all this. So after I figured out what the usage was, besides solar panels being great to take care of your air conditioner energy and all that, you need to get rid of that demand charge, because our church was averaging $500-600 a month on utilities, but only 130 of that was used for total usage. The rest of it was because of demand. So how do you get rid of demand? The gentleman up here was talking about control systems. So worked with the control system provider in downtown Denver, and he was very helpful and gave us a good pricing and explained how to do it. So we first got the control system going. At the same time, we got presentations together for the council. Well, at the same time, we go, how are we going to fund this? Doing a little bit of research, there were some third parties that were offering up PPAs and such. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If they're offering up PPAs and doing this, and they get a 30% tax break, also let it be known that I have solar panels on 3 of my houses, and I did that in 2007. So I was lucky and blessed to have a little bit of history to know the advantage of a tax credit versus a tax deduction. So that helped in this decision. So between me and Steve Kins, I said, all right, are we going to be able to find investors? He goes, you figure out how much it's going to be. I'm sure we'll be able to find investors in our congregation that wants the tax break, because it's a tax break. It's a great tax break. So went through that, found 9 investors, put a presentation together for the investors. A lot of questions. This is this is really pretty complicated stuff. And the people that are up here talking about this, they live and breathe this, and I kind of did for many years. You need to get down into it. And once you get down into it, it starts making sense. But you aren't going to get it. I didn't get it the first day or the second day or the third day. But after I look at my utility bill and I look at the control system and everything else, maybe the 8th time I'm like, yes, this is why we need to do this. So besides the financial savings for the church and going forward, our utility bill right now for electricity is $12.44 a month. And it's going to be that way for here on out because we have a control system and we have a 35 kW solar panel system on our house or on the church's roof. So to get the funding, we did 9 investors. We created an LLC called Holy Sunrays. Steve came up with a number. It's all doable. It's like a $35 fee to create the LLC. You can buy TurboTax and you can put the TurboTax business. 1065, you have 3 expenses maybe and 1 and everything coming in. It's, okay, I guess I'm talking, it's easy. It took me a lot of diligence to figure it out and talk to accountants and such. But it's, if you have time, if you want to take the time, if you want to be a champion, and you get the partnerships, probably explaining to the partners how this was going to work so they all understood, because we had men, women, husbands, wives, they all wanted to be a part of it, because not so much that they were going to make money. We didn't make money at this, but what it was is it's the right thing to do for the church. Our investors, not as big as Milt's project, but, it was a $163,000 system at the time. With rebates, it went down to $90,000. So we had 9 investors, put $10,000 in. You get the credit of $3,000. 9 investors are putting $7,000 in. So you have to hold it for 6 years / 7 years for the depreciation advantage. We just finished it and we sold it to the church last year. The church owns it. Everybody's happy, and it worked out well. I think that's kind of and then I'm going to let you take over, and then we'll talk about. I've got a lot of slides if we can talk about later, too.
Sorry about this. We just didn't get things loaded up earlier.
Yes.
When you sold to the church, just sitting here thinking, so you guys paid a few costs and you installed it as an investor, and then so what's that thing in the middle there?
So during that 7-year period, they started saving money to buy it back from the investors. So it's a win. It's a win. And I think somebody mentioned it's a win-win-win for you feel good about it. It's better than a CD. There's not a CD. Now, maybe when my dad had CDs back in the 70s, they're getting 20%. This is so much better than a CD, and you feel good about it. Even if you.
What's the range?
Roughly 4 to 5%, depending on the depreciation and such. But why do I want that money in a CD when I can make a difference?
Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll move on then. And like I said, the approach that we used is sort of an evolved approach that Todd and others used. And we put this chart together that you see here after the fact. This is sort of like a post-project reflection on what happened, because we really didn't start out with a decent plan beforehand. But looking back, we had about 10 steps that we went through, and the first was, if I can figure this pointer out, the first was to assemble what we call the green team, the advocates, the spark for this program, this renovation program. And then we had to do homework. We had to figure out what it was we really needed based on our previous usage, and start envisioning what the final product would be that you see at the top there. After that, so we had to get into developing a method of financing it, because we learned early on in talking with board members that they told us that if we came in with a proposal that changed the church operating budget, they were going to throw us out of the room. They were dealing at that point in time in 2016 with a $40,000 shortfall in the church operating budget as it was. So here we were proposing to come in with this new idea of changing out the energy system and making it a zero greenhouse gas emission system that we could be proud of, and reflected that we were responding to climate crisis and on and on. But the bottom line was the board was saying it better not cost us anything, and we're not going to give you any upfront money. So those are the ground rules going in. In one sense, it seems kind of tough, but in another sense, it was good that we learned this up front. So we'll talk a little bit about that financing model, but the good news is we did get to the goal in these 10 steps. And on the left of the picture there is a drawing or a rendition from David Barrett's designer. And on the right is a drone picture that I think we got 2 days ago from the group that's sitting out at the table. So it's kind of interesting. We have the vision and we have the reality. It's just really a good feeling to be here. So we were told, in effect, by the board member, we had to have a revenue neutral approach, as I said. And they defined revenue neutral as meaning don't change the church budget. And our problem was that we wanted to have a sustainable energy system, not just solar, because we ran the numbers, we did our homework, and we found that half of our emissions were related to buying power from Xcel using their mix of coal, natural gas, and wind and solar. And at that point, about 80% was still being generated by fossil fuel. And the other half of our emissions was coming from the fact that we were purchasing natural gas and burning it in our natural gas furnaces. There were 10 throughout this building. And that was the other half. The total harm that we were doing was on the order of 100 tons each year, 50% from electric and 50% for heating. So yesterday we had a little workshop where we attempted to show a methodology for coming up with ballpark estimates for what your system can really do. And that's what we referred to earlier as doing your homework. And by doing that, you can get a sense of what the total system is going to cost. If you really want to comply with the IPCC guidelines that we now know about, that this is no longer a situation where we can afford to simply reduce emissions. We have to have a path or envision a path to get to zero. And that means that you can't just stop at solar. You've got to do the whole thing. And we learned early on that the solar portion of it is very lucrative. There's a lot of financial gain involved in that portion of it, not so much in getting rid of your natural gas because of the low price of natural gas. The payback on, as they classically refer to it, is it could be 15, 20 years to pay back a replacement or an alternative to the cheap natural gas systems, whether it's a furnace or a boiler or whatever. But if you bundle the two together and keep it together as a system, which we insisted on doing, and there was a lot of resistance to this, but if you keep it together, you still end up with financial gain after a 20-year period because, as I say, the solar is so, I'll call it lucrative. So the whole thing starts, though, with looking at your current usage, and you can then, from that, estimate what it's going to cost for your replacement system. And this is a spreadsheet we put together, and it was patterned after what we sort of inherited through Todd and through St. John's Episcopal. We had to modify it extensively for our application. We tried to use the LLC approach, but didn't have the, I'll call it the congregational demographics that we needed. We didn't have enough people with a passive income that could really pull off the LLC and take advantage of the 30% tax credit and the depreciation allowances and things like that that a for-profit LLC could do. So we tried another approach. We used a portion of the capital we needed came from donations of people who were dedicated to doing something about climate change, and we appealed to them in many ways. First of all, our faith-based principles, but then we got to them through other methods, other motivations that we won't go into. And one of the reasons we can cut this short is we tried to document our experience here at First Universalist in paperback, and we have a Cliff Notes version that's only about 50 pages. We're trying to make this available to everybody free, essentially, electronically, but we're sort of in a transition here at this church because our senior minister has resigned, and it's rather difficult to get decisions made and get this thing approved. We're not quite sure who does the approval these days, so we're projecting that maybe in a month we'll have this available. Now, we were going to tell you this later, but we do plan after this workshop or this conference to recontact you, since we have all your email addresses, update you with information, because one of the things we want to try and convey is that this is being videotaped, and we'll have it broken up, I think, into different sessions, and we can provide links to these different sessions, the videos, that you can pull up later and review some of the things that were discussed. So as a part of that, we'll give you more information about whether or not this has been released, and you can access it. Anyway, the spreadsheet that we used basically allows you to put in your utility bills that you're currently paying, and it's about, I can't even read this from here, but 17,000, I guess it is, that you total up. And that's what we were paying Excel. So that became a source of, well, we'll say a source of revenue that we could use to pay off or service loans. So the total cost of the equipment that we needed was $443,000. So by knowing what we're currently paying Excel, that sort of determines your annual payment on a loan. And that turned out to be about $250,000 that we could borrow from our members at a low interest rate of 1.5%. And then that meant the remainder of the capital that we needed was about 200 and some thousand. So that was how much we really had to raise in terms of grants and donations. So you combine the loan and the that we could service and the donations, and lo and behold, after quite a bit of work, we were able to come up with the needed capital to just purchase this equipment. So the bottom line was, in gold down there, that we would end up with we'll call it a financial gain at the end of 20 years of about $180,000. So that was our approach to getting the capital assembled for this renovation, or the energy system. The total renovation, by the way, was around $4.5 million. The energy system was 10% of that, around $450,000. So this is a kind of an interesting number, the 10%, because we found that to be a similar case in residential transitions, that take the market value of your property and take 10%, and you can probably put on solar and get rid of your natural gas system as well as what we were able to do here. So I think I'll stop at this point and ask if there are any questions. Yes. That is just an air duct, and that would be the same if it were a natural gas furnace. So that's just for the hot air. Yeah. No, in this case now, it's all heated by thermal energy that was extracted actually from under the north parking lot. So, yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, good question. The loans are paid off at that point, and so, in effect, the, quote, utility bill doesn't go to zero because, there's still a monthly service charge, plus we're finding what Todd talked about. We, at this point, without a control system, we're getting peaks over 25 kW, and we're getting hammered by demand charges. And that will still be in effect if we don't get it fixed. I think we put in, well, that chart isn't the right one. I think we put in like $3,000 a year just for the demand charges, even though we're not buying anything from them. That's the sad part. And it's only because of Sundays. And that's not a fair game either. So there's lots of things that we can do to try to adjust we'll call it the social system that nonprofits have to deal with. One, we don't get the incentives that residential people do and businesses, for-profit businesses. So anyway, there's lots of things to do here. Any other questions? Yes.
What
Okay.
do you do when the system wears out? So the system, let's say it lasts 25 years and you had to raise $400,000, part through a loan and part through donations. You have to do that all over again in 20 years?
Well, if we were smart, we would take that $180,000 that is a financial gain and start investing in replacing solar panels and heat pumps and all that. The good news about a geothermal system is the infrastructure that you have to put in for the heat exchanger part that's buried will last for 50 to 200 years. So it's almost like a one-time front-end cost. So even though we'll have to replace motors in the furnaces after 20 years or 25 years, we won't have to replace the pipes that are in the ground for circulating water. And that was about, well, it wasn't half, but it was about a third of the cost. So if that infrastructure is in place, it's more like you just are replacing a typical gas-fired furnace if you don't have to replace your pipes. Mm-hmm. So I think the money that we're gaining, or the financial gain, could then just be rolled over to start replacing the second system, the second generation.
Thank you.
Yes? In blue back here?
I have a couple of questions about the member loans.
Yes.
Okay, first off, are there IRS restrictions on what interest minimum or maximum interest you can charge? Second question is, how did you get the loan? What was the loan process? Did you have your church treasurer handle it, or did you go through a bank, or what was that process?
Actually, it was the Green First team that did all the soliciting, and it was, I'll call it almost one-on-one type of soliciting to get pledges. We had a fairly elaborate educational program to increase awareness of the whole congregation, and Tom Abood talked about that a little bit earlier for the green certification process. So in some sense, we were sensitive. The whole congregation was sensitive, but we had to inform them about geothermal, for example, and that was a struggle. We had town hall meetings, we had a science presentation, we had a geothermal 101 seminar, and a couple other workshops. But when it came right down to it, you're dealing with rational people, and they can understand if you take the time to explain things to them. And we had lots of examples. I had a number of people out to my home. They went down into the basement and they saw the geothermal heat pump I had. It looked just like a furnace, so they were totally underwhelmed by what it was, because if it didn't have the sign on it, they wouldn't have known. So anyway, the process didn't impose anything on the church staff, because the green team did all the homework and the soliciting. And we showed up at the board with the financing in place, basically, and said, we're not going to change your budget. Here's the pledges. Basically, the money was in the bank. So it was hard for him to reject it.
So the loan process was actually a pledge process.
I'm sorry?
The loan, as far as getting loans from members.
The members will have to pay tax on the 1.5%. That huge benefit that they get.
So
I got my first payment back in January, my installment, because I did load the church a little bit of money, and I did have to report that.
So you had to have a contract with the church.
That's
for your tax documentation.
the
That's what I'm getting at.
yeah. We have a partnership, and I wish Tom Abood was here. He could explain that. It's not an LLC, but it's just a partnership of about 15 people that loan the church money. And so the church pays the partnership, and then the partnership once a year distributes, a repayment to the 15 people. And they're all different. They loan different amounts of money, so it comes back differently.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Let me just add that Tom was instrumental because he's a lawyer. So he was able to help us draw up, an agreement that made sense to everybody And then he distributed that to all of us who are investors. And he is actually then managing the account himself and the distributions. Yep. Mhm.
If I can clarify something real quick, solar panels are warranted for 25 years,
Yes.
produce at least 85%. So it's not like they stop working. And it's not like you have to replace them after 25 years.
Good point.
This isn't, so don't think of it as, okay, every 20, 25 years we have to do things. You shouldn't. A good quality installation with quality equipment, you should not have a bunch of maintenance. You shouldn't have to worry about any of that, except maybe you'll have to replace inverters every 10, 15, or even 20 years because they keep getting better too. So I just,
Good point.
hopefully you won't have to worry about it. But yes, you absolutely should be reinvesting the savings so that when you do get to that point, you already have that money available. So hopefully that helps make a little more sense. We look at it, I mean, the stuff that were made 40 years ago still work. 50 years ago, they're still working. So you might just need to add another 10 panels or 20 panels in 25 years. And that's it. Easy.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to foresee 20 years from now in terms of the solar technology and the efficiency of the panels. And it may be prudent to replace them with the latest efficiencies. And my hope is, and I don't know if I'll live long enough to see this, but I would like to see a solar recycling facility that's solar powered. And once we get to that, it's sort of like the atoms themselves never wear out. So this is perpetual then, and we can go on as long as the sun shines. So, and it's possible, there's no reason why we can't have a solar recycling plant that uses renewable energy. So anyway. Oh, another question, yes.
So I was just curious, and I probably would have learned this on a tour, but how big is your system? How many lines went down?
There were 12 boreholes, and they're 400 feet deep. So that's 4,800 feet of borehole, or 9,600 feet of pipe for heat transfer purposes. And it's a 45-ton rated system if you add all of the 10 furnaces together, so that the pipe system out under the parking lot is rated to, 10 furnaces, 10 heat pump furnaces. I know, it's crazy, but it's sort of the result of having to deal with an existing building because we didn't tear the whole thing down. I guess I better quit.